Archie.
You've actually sold your Bitcoin.
Yeah. I'm a big advocate for self-custody. And the reason for that is that we want Bitcoin to be the freedom money we've always dreamed of. We want it to be robust from nation-state attack. We want it to be robust from being rugged by any large actor. And that requires self-custody, and all of us holding this in separate private key pockets of millions and billions of wallets everywhere, because we don't want the repeat of gold, where at the end of World War II we centralized the gold under Fort Knox. You can still claim it. We'll use the US dollar as the claim on it. But then so many years later, the US probably was not good for it. Like the Fort Knox was never audited, and they closed the convertibility window, meaning you couldn't redeem your US dollar for gold. So now you got fiat. And so that doesn't happen when the supply of the gold is everywhere, right? Amongst, and back then amongst many nation states and so forth. And Bitcoin, you want that to be very dispersed, okay? So that's first and foremost. So we want self-custody. But you and I know that we're known figures in Bitcoin. I think that, the work I do is to advocate for Bitcoin, to talk about what it is, to ask questions about it, and try and understand what happens in every cycle, help broaden the adoption. But also, we've been in this for how long? I've been in this for 12 years, and there's a security risk with that. And part of the reason why I went off the podcast circuit in 2021, 2022 was because people were recognizing me on the streets in random spots. And, I'm starting a family. I want to focus on them, but I'm also thinking about security. And so, I think if you're prominent in the space, you really don't want to be holding private keys. I think there's, we're here in the Honey Badger conference, and the bankers are coming in and talking about it in the institutional day, that they're getting a lot of clients from Wales. And the reason for that is they don't want to hold their private keys anymore. And so that's part of it. But the other part of it is, my background is in founding tech startups. That's how I found Bitcoin. And I think there's a lot of cool stuff to build right now, and like to support that. And I think that assisting in the picks and shovels of this industry is pretty good to do. We're in a very nascent stage in terms of what can you do with your Bitcoins? HODL it, but what else? And can I borrow against it? Can I, move it up to higher layers to do flips and tricks, stuff that we've never even dreamed about. And I think all of that stuff is going to be worked out, and I think it'll be very exciting. And if you get it right, it'll outperform Bitcoin, right? Coinbase outperformed Bitcoin by a factor of 0.5, meaning for every Bitcoin you invested, you got half a Bitcoin back. And that was something that went from seed to IPO from 2011 or 12 to IPO roughly 10 years later. And so you keep your Bitcoins. Say when I got into it and I invested in Exodus Wallet, it did a 2 to 3x. Bitcoin was growing at 100% per annum. Today it's growing at 20 to say 50% per annum. You can outperform Bitcoin if you get it right. So I don't think it's a bad investment, and that they tend to be de-risked because they hold some of their treasury in Bitcoin. So if they fail, then you still got a bit of residual Bitcoin in that treasury. So I think it's a fine trade-off.
A lot of people seem to look at, because Bitcoin is such a good investment in the long term, they look at any alternative investment as somehow playing fiat games. What would you say to that?
Can you give an example of an alternative investment?
Okay, you're buying Apple stock.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's a free market. It's a free market. If you believe in Bitcoin, you believe in freedom, you should be go for it. Maybe you can outperform your current asset. Maybe you want diversification of price movement. Maybe you want some yield because you're older and you need to retire on some income. I think it's great, like we fall into this trap of everyone should be in my situation. I'm going to hodl to the moon. Someone asked, is this going to be a good investment for me? And I said, depends if you're going to die next year, probably not. But if you've got another 10 years on this investment, it's probably one of the best you can make in your lifetime. So, we're kind of opinionated. We're kind of like the church of Bitcoin in the industry. There is an ideology. I think that's necessary. We're a new money coming into the world. And with that comes ideology. You got to believe in it.
But ideology is separate from dogma though, right?
Yeah, I think, it's a spectrum of dogma to ideology, and there's going to be people that are open-minded, and there's going to be people that's closed-minded. That's called dogma. And we're going to have the whole spectrum. And I think it's look at the gold bugs. There's belief in that. And everyone subliminally believes fiat has value. And I think Bitcoin is very strong with the belief side because it's the same thing. Money's only accepted when there's a belief in there, and that's what it is.
You've been a founder in technology as well, haven't you? So,
yeah.
And it's like when we look at the Bitcoin landscape, what sort of themes are running through the landscape for an investor? What kind of opportunities? How do you group those kinds of companies and opportunities from an investor point of view? And how do you think they'll impact or facilitate consumer finance, retail finance?
Well, I'm not a VC. I'm an angel investor. And an angel investor, you want to work with, founders that you like working with. You want to be able to assist with what you've learned and your reach and so forth. So I always look for something that I can add value to. If I can't, then there's no point in it. And so for me, my background is in markets. It's running hedge funds. We work with banks now, wealth management banks. And so having an understanding of those sort of dynamics, it really lends me towards the finance side of it. And there's so much out there. You can work on a layer 2. You can work on Lightning. There's all these really interesting technologies, but that's not my wheelhouse. And so I'm really focusing on the things that I can add value and the things I can understand. And so, for example, I invested in DeBiFi, sponsor the show, blah blah. But that is my wheelhouse. Right, that is a financial. That's financial infrastructure. We already work with banks. I understand the interest rates, why the interest rates are going up and down, and where the demand supply is. I have the capable of raising capital to feed into this. So there's all these things that compound, and that is the type of investment I want to do. I like investments that are easy to win. Some of these investments are like when you win really, really big. It's the next, massive unicorn, but your chance of getting there is like a grind until it works. And I like things that are less like that. I just want to, for example, lending is very fragmented. You could see that in the mortgage markets. I think that you can create a great business. It doesn't have to be called the next great startup that scales to 10,000x. We've got Bitcoin tailwinds, and that's the key thing. If you look at Bitcoin going from 2 trillion to 200 trillion over the next, 10, 20 years, that's a big tailwind. And all this venture has to do is deliver, and Bitcoin will do the rest. That's why I like this industry. I'd hate to be investing in, say, DeFi or some sort of fancy technology using altcoins and blockchain, because you work out that growth, it's on the most optimistic view, $1.5 trillion in market cap, to how much of the world economy can be powered by this. And, the figures, depends how you do it, but it's around 15 trillion of the global economy and equities value. That's kind of like, if blockchains can take 15% of the world's equity value, which is pretty, that's pretty outlandish. It's big. I think, that's only a 10x growth. Bitcoin's got 100x growth. And so the tailwinds behind Bitcoin are incredible, and I'd hate to be a crypto VC. Your risks are so high, and the growth isn't going to be that great. It's just putting rails onto blockchains.
So as a consumer, when I think about Bitcoin picks and shovels, like there are wallets, there are exchanges, different types of exchanges, there are apps that help you buy. Maybe there might even be a social element for connecting Bitcoiners and whatnot. Mm-hmm. What else is there in the landscape of investment opportunities that you might consider Bitcoin financial infrastructure? Payments is the other I guess.
Payments, but I think we're quite a far way away from that. I guess look at all the functions that banks historically have done, and what does that look like in the Bitcoin landscape? Do Bitcoiners want to borrow against their Bitcoins? Absolutely they do. Just look at the things we want. Do we want a Bitcoin-backed credit card? All the stuff. Can we be part of the financial infrastructure that the rest of the world enjoys, but on Bitcoin? And there's a lot to build. And then we can get off into the magical land, which we don't know much about, which is what does Bitcoin want to do? Like, what is this new medium? And I've said, if you look at TV, when that came through as a medium, we did radio with picture shows. It was literally radio with pictures. And then come another generation, we're doing sitcoms and miniseries. And it took a generation to figure out, 25 years to figure out what this medium is really good for. And I think right now we're just putting the boring shit onto Bitcoin, the stuff we need, but what are the flips and tricks that can be done with this technology? And I think that's kind of the high risk unicorn stuff, right? Like, can I build XYZ as if, like we've never seen it before? Like, what does, I imagine Twitter was a crazy thing when it came out and launched in South by Southwest. Why would you want to send 140 characters to each other? And they figured out the short attention spans, and it was hooky, and who would have thought that in the age of blogs, and you could do all the stuff anyway?
Well, even as a pitch back then, like Facebook was predominant, right? You could have just dismissed it as saying, what, these are just status updates on Facebook. You want to create a whole app for that? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But it developed a completely different culture around the type of, everything that's done on Twitter could have, in theory, been done on Facebook. Mm-hmm. But it just developed a completely different dynamic and sharing ecosystem. The pattern of behavior of surfacing information and engaging and interacting with different accounts, it just developed on its own in a completely different way to Facebook.
And you couldn't see that. No. You could not see that.
I thought it was frivolous because it was by text message at the start, weren't they? It was just nonsense.
You just have we don't have an idea of what, like it turns out Twitter was one of the native expressions of the internet. Social media we went from magazine and newspaper to social media, and that was the native expression of this medium. What is the native expression of Bitcoin? We don't know. We're just putting banking stuff on it. And that's relatively easy to see what, we do this, we do that. TradFi people are doing this and investing into that type of infrastructure. So, there's a lot of exciting stuff to come, and it'll be very high risk because you don't know the future. But it'll be very, very magical and unpredictable, let's say.